My name is Henry Caldwell, and I am 64 years old. For 33 years, I taught mathematics and physics at Lincoln High School, a public school in a district where the heating failed every winter and the textbooks were older than the students holding them. I have been retired for 3 years. I live in the same colonial house where I raised my daughter, a three-bedroom home with a porch that needs paint and a mortgage that was paid off in 2012. I own one suit. I have one daughter. Her name is Olivia. And 3 days before her wedding, she told me I was no longer welcome to attend. The call came on a Wednesday evening. I was grading the last of the summer school exams I had volunteered to review, sitting at the kitchen table where Olivia had done her homework every night from first grade through senior year. The table still had the ink stain she had made when she decided to become a journalist, convinced that words could change the world the way equations had changed mine. My phone rang, and I saw her name on the screen. I smiled before I answered. I always smiled when Olivia called, even though lately those calls had become shorter and the spaces between her sentences had filled with a hesitation I did not understand. She did not say hello. She said, "Dad, we need to talk about Saturday." I told her I had already pressed my suit. It was navy blue, the same suit I had worn to her college graduation 5 years ago, the same suit I had worn to her mother's funeral 12 years before that. I told her I had bought a new tie, burgundy, because she had once said it brought out the gray in my hair. I told her I was looking forward to walking her down the aisle, just as I had promised her mother in the hospital room where we both knew she was dying. Olivia was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Marcus and his mother reviewed the guest list. The venue is intimate. They had to make difficult choices." I felt the first cold thread of understanding begin to weave itself through my chest, but I did not pull it tight. Not yet. I asked her what she meant. She said, "Your seat has been reallocated. It's nothing personal. It's just that Marcus's family has certain standards, and the photographer, the seating chart, the overall narrative of the day." I asked her if I was being uninvited to my own daughter's wedding. She sighed. The sigh was practiced, impatient, the same sigh she had used since she was 16 when I told her she could not take the car to a party where there would be no adult supervision. She said, "Don't be dramatic. You were never formally invited. You were told the date. There's a difference." Marcus's mother, Eleanor, feels very strongly that every guest should reflect the couple's future trajectory. Your background doesn't align with the image we're presenting. I looked down at my hands. They were hands that had held chalk for 3 decades. Hands that had written recommendation letters until my fingers cramped. Hands that had packed Olivia's dorm room boxes and carried her furniture to 3 different apartments. They were also hands that had spent every evening from 4 to 8 o'clock in an empty classroom, tutoring a boy who had nowhere else to go. They were not hands that had ever signed a venture capital check, and apparently, that was the only measure that mattered now. I asked her if she agreed with Eleanor. Olivia said, "Marcus has worked very hard to build something from nothing. His family opened doors for him that you could never imagine. I need you to respect that." I told her I respected hard work. I had simply hoped she still respected her father. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat at that kitchen table until the street light outside flickered on. I did not sleep. I kept hearing her voice, polished and precise, as if she were reading from script someone else had written. And perhaps she was. The script of Marcus Reed and his mother, Eleanor, who lived in a world where people were divided into 2 categories: those who invented themselves and those who were grateful to be allowed to stand near the invention. I had met Marcus only twice. The first time was at a restaurant where the napkins were larger than my kitchen towels. He had shaken my hand with the grip of a man who was measuring my worth by the softness of my palms. He had asked me what I did for a living, and when I told him I was retired from public education and now tutored students pro bono for college entrance exams, he had smiled the way people smile at a relic. He had said, "How noble," and ordered a wine that cost more than my monthly pension. The second time was at the engagement party held at the Reed family estate, a property so large I had needed directions to find a bathroom. Eleanor had cornered me by the fireplace and asked, in a voice dripping with synthetic concern, if I was comfortable with the financial burden of the wedding. I had told her that Olivia and I had discussed it, and that I had set aside $30,000 to help with the expenses. She had laughed. It was a small laugh, delicate and deadly, and she had said, "Oh, Henry, the invitations alone were $25,000, but it's sweet that you offered." I had not offered again. I had simply watched Olivia float through that room in a dress that cost more than my first car, laughing at jokes she did not understand, touching Marcus's arm as if he were a trophy she had won a contest I had not been invited to judge. I had told myself it was just a phase. I had told myself that the little girl who had cried when I worked late, the girl who had slept with a photograph of me under her pillow, was still in there somewhere, buried beneath the designer labels and the etiquette lessons. The phone call on Wednesday proved she was not. The next morning, I did something I had not done in years. I opened the cedar chest in my basement and took out the box marked students. I had not looked at it in a long time because I did not need to. The memories were enough. But now, sitting in the dark of that basement, I unfolded a photograph that I had kept for 25 years. It was a picture of 5 teenagers in graduation gowns, standing on the steps of Lincoln High School. In the center was a tall, thin boy with dark hair and eyes that looked older than his 18 years. He was holding a trophy for excellence in mathematics, and he was smiling in a way that suggested he did not yet believe he deserved it. His name was Marcus Brown. That was the name I had written on his diploma. That was the name on the recommendation letter I had spent 3 weeks crafting, the letter that had gone to the admissions office at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. That was the name of the boy who had eaten Thanksgiving dinner at my table for 4 consecutive years because he had no family to go home to. I had not recognized him at first when Olivia brought him to the house 6 months ago. The boy in a photograph was gaunt and uncertain. The man who had shaken my hand was tanned and confident, with teeth that had been straightened and a watch that cost more than my annual salary. He had introduced himself as Marcus Reed. He had explained that he was the founder and chief executive officer of Reed Technologies, a company valued at $42 million. He had said he grew up in Boston, attended private schools, and received his seed funding from a family friend who recognized his potential early. I had stared at him, searching for the boy I had known, and then I had seen it. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the one he had gotten in a fight behind the gymnasium when he was 16, defending a freshman from 3 seniors. I had been the one who drove him to the hospital. I had been the one who sat with him until 3 in the morning while he cried and told me he had never had anyone stand up for him before. I had said, "Marcus? Marcus Brown." He had looked at me with the blank politeness of a stranger. He had said, "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" I had told him I was Henry Caldwell. I had told him I taught at Lincoln High. I had told him I remembered a student named Marcus Brown who had graduated in 2003, a student who had slept in the school library for 2 weeks when his foster home closed, a student who had eaten more meals at my kitchen table than in the cafeteria. Marcus had smiled, a slow, careful smile. He had turned to Olivia and said, "Your father must be confusing me with someone else." I grew up in Beacon Hill. My father was a professor at Harvard Business School. I never attended public school. Olivia had looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was embarrassment, sharp and hot, directed not at Marcus, but at me. She had said, "Dad, please, don't make things up to impress him." I had not made anything up, but I had seen something in Marcus's eyes when I mentioned Lincoln High. It was not confusion. It was fear. The fear of a man who had built a mansion on a foundation he had spent 20 years trying to bury. That night, after Marcus left, Olivia had accused me of sabotaging her relationship. She had said I was jealous. She had said I could not accept that she had found someone who could give her the life I never could. She had said that Marcus's mother was right, that I was emotionally stunted and unable to let go. And then she had stopped calling. Until Wednesday, when she called to tell me I was not good enough to watch her marry a man I had fed when he was hungry. Now, sitting in my basement with that photograph, I opened the file I had kept on Marcus Brown. Inside were the records of a boy who had arrived at Lincoln High in 1999 with a transcript from 3 different schools and a social worker's report that said he was at risk. Inside was the recommendation letter I had written in 2002, a letter so detailed it had taken me 3 weeks to compose. I had described his mathematical intuition as rare and profound. I had described his character as forged in adversity but unbroken. I had described his potential as limitless, if only someone would give him a chance. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology had given him that chance. A full scholarship, room and board, a stipend for books. And 4 years later, Marcus Brown had graduated with a degree in computer science and a job offer from a venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. I had received one letter from him, postmarked from California in 2007. It had said, "Dear Mr. Caldwell, I got the job. Thank you for believing in me when no one else did. Sincerely, Marcus." I had kept that letter in the file. I unfolded it now and read it again. Then I opened my laptop and searched for Marcus Reed. The results were impressive. Articles in business magazines, profiles in technology journals, a TED Talk with 2 million views. In every photograph, he was standing in front of a whiteboard or a skyline, wearing a suit that cost more than my car, talking about bootstrapping and the entrepreneurial spirit. In every interview, he told the same story. He had grown up in a privileged but challenging household in Boston. His father had been a professor. His mother had been a philanthropist. He had attended preparatory academies before discovering his passion for coding. He had received his initial funding from a family friend who believed in his vision. There was no mention of Lincoln High School, no mention of a foster system, no mention of a mathematics teacher who had stayed until 8 o'clock every night for 3 years, teaching him calculus and physics, and, more importantly, teaching him that he was not defined by the circumstances of his birth. I searched deeper. I found an article from 2015, a profile in a financial magazine. It described Marcus Reed's origin story in detail. It said he had overcome a modest upbringing through sheer determination and family support. It said his first investor had been a distinguished family friend who had recognized his potential during his sophomore year at a private academy. I knew that investor. It was not a family friend. It was a government grant for foster youth, a program I had helped Marcus apply for in his senior year. I had filled out the paperwork myself, sitting at this same kitchen table, while Olivia did her homework across from me, and Marcus slept on the couch because his foster placement had ended and he had nowhere else to go. I closed the laptop. I did not feel anger. I felt a sadness so deep it had no bottom. Marcus had not simply forgotten me. He had erased me. He had erased the school. He had erased the foster system. He had erased every hand that had lifted him up, and he had replaced us all with a fiction so polished it had fooled my own daughter. The next day, Thursday, I called the principal of Lincoln High School, a woman named Patricia who had been my student teacher in 2005. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and surprised. I told her I needed access to the school archives from 2003. I told her I needed a copy of the graduation video. I told her I needed the original of a recommendation letter I had written 25 years ago. She said, "Henry, is everything okay?" I told her everything was not okay. I told her that a man who had eaten Thanksgiving dinner at my table was about to marry my daughter, and he had told her that I was a stranger. I told her I needed proof that I was not losing my mind. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "The archives are digital now. I can have everything emailed to you by dinner." "But Henry, are you sure you want to do this? Some people build new lives because the old ones hurt too much to remember." I told her that was true, but some people built new lives by stealing the old ones from the people who had loved them, and I was not going to let my daughter marry a thief. That evening, I received 3 emails. The first was a PDF of my original recommendation letter, scanned from the paper file. The second was a digital copy of the graduation video, 2 hours long, with a timestamp at 1 hour and 17 minutes. The third was a photograph I had never seen before, taken by the school newspaper. It showed Marcus and me on the stage at the graduation ceremony. He was holding his diploma. I was standing beside him, my hand on his shoulder, and both of us were crying. I watched the video. At 1 hour and 17 minutes, Marcus Brown walked to the podium to give the valedictorian address. He was 18 years old. He was wearing a graduation gown that I had paid for because his foster agency could not afford it. He looked out at the audience, and he said, "There is one person in this room who believed I could be here before I believed it myself. Mr. Caldwell, you stayed with me until 8 o'clock every night for 3 years. You taught me that my circumstances were not my destiny. You were the first person who ever told me I was worth something. And if I ever amount to anything in this world, it will be because you saw something in me that I could not see in myself." The camera panned to me. I was sitting in the front row, next to Olivia, who was 8 years old and holding a bouquet of dandelions she had picked for Marcus. I was crying. Olivia was clapping, and Marcus was looking directly at me with an expression of gratitude, so raw it could have lit the room. I watched that video until 3 in the morning. Then I made a decision. I did not want revenge. I wanted truth. Not the theatrical truth of movie villains, but the quiet, immovable truth of a man who has nothing left to lose and nothing left to prove. On Friday, the day before the wedding, I did something I had not done in 20 years. I drove to Boston. I parked my car in front of a building I'd seen only in photographs, the headquarters of Reed Technologies, a glass tower that reflected the sky like a mirror. I walked into the lobby and asked the receptionist if I could speak with Marcus Reed. I told her my name was Henry Caldwell. I told her I had taught Marcus mathematics in high school. I told her I had a video I thought he should see before his wedding. She looked at me with the polite confusion of someone who had been trained to recognize importance, and I was not wearing it. She said, "Mr. Reed is in meetings all day. I could take a message." I said, "Tell him the man who wrote his MIT recommendation is sitting in his lobby with a videotape and a photograph. Tell him he has until 5 o'clock to come down and talk to me. After that, I will talk to whoever will listen." I sat in that lobby for 4 hours. I did not move. I did not check my phone. I simply held the envelope containing the photograph and the flash drive containing the video, and I waited. At 4:30, a security guard approached me. He was large and professional, and he said, "Mr. Caldwell, Mr. Reed will see you now." He took me to a conference room on the 34th floor. The windows looked out over the city, a view so vast it made me dizzy. Marcus was sitting at the head of a table that could have seated 20 people. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my house. He was alone. He did not stand when I entered. He said, "Henry, I was hoping you would be smart enough to let this go." I sat down across from him. I placed the envelope on the table. I said, "Marcus, I did not come here to ruin you. I came here to give you a chance to tell my daughter the truth before I do." He laughed. It was a small, cold sound, nothing like the laugh of the boy I had known. He said, "The truth? The truth is that I built a $42 million company while you were grading algebra tests. The truth is that I created a life that you could never have imagined for me. And the truth is that Olivia deserves that life, not the small, sad existence you wanted her to settle for." I said. I never wanted her to settle. I wanted her to be honest. And I wanted the man she marries to be honest with her. I opened the envelope. I slid the photograph across the table. It showed the two of us on that graduation stage, 25 years ago, both of us crying. I slid the flash drive next to it. I said, "This is your valedictorian speech. This is you thanking me for staying until 8 o'clock every night. This is you saying I was the first person who ever told you that you were worth something. And this is the letter I wrote to MIT, describing your character as unbroken and your potential as limitless." Marcus looked at the photograph. For a moment, something flickered across his face. It might have been memory. It might have been shame. But then it was gone, replaced by the smooth mask of the man he had become. He pushed the photograph back toward me. He said, "That was a long time ago. I was a child. I'm not that person anymore. And neither are you. You are a retired schoolteacher with a pension and a mortgage. I am Marcus Reed. I have a team of lawyers who will bury you in litigation if you breathe a word of this to anyone, including my fiancé." I stood up. I picked up the photograph and the flash drive. I said, "Marcus, I did not come here to take anything from you. I came here to see if the boy I knew was still in there. He is not, and that is the saddest thing I have ever had to accept." I walked out. The security guard followed me to the elevator. No one else stopped me. I drove home, watching the sunset paint the highway in shades of orange I had not noticed in years. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had written that recommendation letter 25 years ago, and I thought about the nature of gratitude. I thought about how easily it could be replaced by ambition, and how ambition without memory was just greed wearing a better suit. The next morning was Saturday, the day of the wedding. I woke up at 6 o'clock with a clarity I had not felt in decades. I put on my navy blue suit and my burgundy tie. I combed my hair. I looked in a mirror and saw a man who had spent his life teaching other people's children how to build foundations, while his own daughter had been taught to despise him for the crime of being ordinary. I did not drive to the church. I drove to the hotel where the reception was being held, a historic estate on the outskirts of the city. I arrived at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 hours before the ceremony. I parked my car in the back lot, near the service entrance, and I walked inside through the kitchen. No one stopped me. I looked like a caterer or perhaps a lost uncle. I wandered through the ballroom, touching the linen tablecloths, smelling the flowers that had cost more than my annual pension. On the gift table, there was a framed photograph of Olivia and Marcus, blown up to poster size, smiling in front of a private jet. I did not recognize her smile. It was too wide, too careful, the same smile Marcus wore in every business magazine. I took a seat in the last row of the chapel, on the groom's side, behind a pillar covered in white roses. From there, I could see everything and be seen by no one. The guests arrived in waves, women in dresses that whispered when they moved, men who laughed with their heads thrown back, showing teeth that had been straightened since childhood. At 4 o'clock, the string quartet began to play. The chapel fell silent. Olivia walked down the aisle at 4:15. She was wearing a gown that looked like it had been spun from starlight. She was holding a bouquet of white lilies, the same flowers her mother had carried on our wedding day 32 years ago. For a moment, I forgot about Marcus and the lies and the photograph in my pocket. I simply saw my little girl in a white dress, walking toward a future she had chosen. I wanted to be happy for her. I wanted to believe that this was what she truly wanted. But then Marcus turned to look at her, and I saw the expression on his face. It was not love. It was acquisition. The satisfaction of a man who had purchased something expensive and was now displaying it for his investors. The officiant began to speak. He talked about love and sacrifice and the joining of two families. I listened to the words, and I realized that I was not part of either family being joined. I was the ghost at the feast, the inconvenient truth that had been edited out of the narrative. When the officiant reached the part where he asked if anyone objected, I did not stand. I had not come to stop the wedding. I had come to bear witness. But when the ceremony ended and the guests began to move toward the ballroom for the reception, I stood up and walked toward the head table. A security guard moved to intercept me, but I was already there. I was already standing in front of Marcus and Olivia, in front of Eleanor and 200 guests who had turned to stare. Olivia saw me first. Her face went pale. She said, "Dad, what are you doing here?" I said, "Olivia, I am not here to ruin your day. I am here to give you a wedding gift." I pulled an envelope from my jacket pocket. It was not large. It contained 3 items. The first was the photograph of Marcus and me on the graduation stage, 25 years ago, both of us crying. The second was a printed copy of the recommendation letter I had written to MIT, with my signature at the bottom and the date, October 14th, 2002. The third was a flash drive. I handed the envelope to Olivia. I said, "Your fiancé told you he grew up in Beacon Hill. He told you his father was a Harvard professor. He told you he attended private academies and received his seed funding from a family friend. None of that is true. His name was Marcus Brown. He grew up in the foster system. He attended Lincoln High School, a public school with broken heating and old textbooks. He slept in the school library for 2 weeks when his foster home closed. And the only reason he is standing here today, in a suit that costs more than my house, is because a retired school teacher stayed with him until 8 o'clock every night for 3 years and wrote a letter that convinced MIT to give him a chance." The room was completely silent. I could hear a wine glass trembling in someone's hand. I turned to Marcus. I said, "I did not come here to take anything from you. I came here to see if you would tell her yourself. You would not. So I'm telling her for you." Marcus's face had gone the color of ash. He said, "This is a lie. This is a fabrication. My lawyers." I interrupted him gently. I said, "Marcus, I have no lawyers. I have no team. I have 1 suit and 1 daughter. And I would rather lose the respect of every person in this room than let my daughter marry a man who is ashamed of where he came from. Because a man who is ashamed of his past will lie about his future." Olivia was staring at the photograph. She was staring at the letter. She was staring at the boy in the graduation gown, the boy who had thanked the teacher for believing in him. Then she looked at Marcus. She looked at the man who had told her that my memories were fantasies, that my recognition was delusion, that my love was an embarrassment. She said, "Marcus, is this true?" He did not answer. He looked at Eleanor, who was standing with her hand over her mouth, her diamonds catching the light like shattered glass. He looked at the guests, who were whispering and pulling out their phones. He looked at me with an expression that was not anger, but panic. The panic of a man who had built a cathedral on sand and was watching the tide come in. Olivia said, "You looked me in the eye and told me my father was confused. You looked me in the eye and told me you had never seen him before in your life. You made me choose between the man who raised me and the man I thought I loved. And you lied." She pulled the engagement ring from her finger. She did not throw it. She placed it on the table, next to the photograph, and she said, "I am not leaving you because you grew up in foster care. I am leaving you because you were ashamed of it. I am leaving you because you erased the only person who ever believed in you. And if you can do that to him, you will do it to me." She walked down the aisle. She did not run. She walked the same way she had walked in, with her head high and her shoulders straight. I followed her. I did not look back at Marcus. I did not need to. I had seen enough. Outside in the parking lot, Olivia stopped beside my car. She was crying. She said, "Dad, I am so sorry. I am so sorry I believed him. I am so sorry I let them make me ashamed of you." I put my arms around her. I said, "You do not have to be sorry for loving someone. You only have to be careful about who you let teach you what love looks like. We sat in my car for a long time, watching the guests leave in ones and twos, their expensive shoes clicking on the pavement. We did not talk about Marcus. We talked about her mother. We talked about the time Olivia had won the third grade spelling bee and I had taken her for ice cream. We talked about the dandelions she had picked for Marcus at his graduation, the ones that had wilted in her small hand while she clapped for a boy who had nowhere else to go. 3 weeks later, I read in the newspaper that Reed Technologies had lost 3 major contracts. The investors had discovered that Marcus Reed's biography was fabricated, that his family connections were fiction, and that his first round of funding had come from a government grant for foster youth, not from a distinguished family friend. The company's valuation dropped by 60%. Marcus resigned as chief executive officer. Eleanor sold the estate. I did not celebrate. I sat on my porch in the chair that had belonged to my father, and I watched the oak trees sway. I had not lost my daughter. She had come home, and in the end, that was the only truth that could not be taken away. Olivia moved back to the city where I lived. She took a job at a local newspaper covering education policy, and she wrote her first feature article about the Lincoln High School archive and the teacher who had stayed until 8 o'clock every night. She dedicated it to her mother. She brought me a copy on a Sunday afternoon, and we sat on that porch together, reading it aloud, while the sun went down behind the same oak trees I had planted when she was small enough to carry on my shoulders. Sometimes, late at night, my phone rings. I always answer. It has never been Marcus. I do not think it ever will be, but I still hope, somewhere in the silence, that he has found his way back to the boy who once believed that gratitude was stronger than ambition, because that boy was worth saving, and the man he became still has time to remember it. Was I wrong to expose my daughter's fiancé on their wedding day? Or was I the only one telling her the truth before it was too late? You tell me.